Jake and Emily had been best friends for as long as they could remember. They met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions, and shared frustrations about life, and somehow their friendship never wavered. They had seen each other through everything: heartbreaks, failures, successes, and silly drunken nights. But through it all, their relationship remained just that: friendship. Neither of them had ever truly considered crossing the line. Emily had dated a few guys over the years, none of whom lasted long. Jake had his fair share of relationships too, though nothing serious ever stuck. But no matter what, they always had each other. They were the one constant in each other's lives, the person they could always call no matter what time it was. That Friday night felt no different at first. Emily had just gone through another breakup, and she needed a distraction. She called Jake, knowing he'd be there for her. "Come over," Jake said over the phone. "We'll have a few drinks and talk about how much of an idiot your ex is." Emily laughed, already feeling better. "You always know what to say." An hour later, she knocked on Jake's apartment door. When he opened it, she saw the familiar warmth in his eyes. He had already set up their usual drinking spot: the couch, a bottle of whiskey on the table, and a playlist of old songs they both loved playing softly in the background. "You're the best," Emily said, stepping inside and kicking off her shoes. "I know," Jake teased, handing her a glass. "Now, tell me what happened." Emily sighed and flopped onto the couch. "It's the same old story. He said he wasn't ready for something serious. But, we were together for almost a year. How do you not know if you're ready after a whole year?" Jake shook his head. "He's an idiot. And you deserve better." Emily smiled at him, her heart warming at his words. She had always loved how Jake never sugarcoated things, but he always made her feel valued. She took a sip of her drink, letting the warmth spread through her. As the night went on, they drank more, laughed harder, and talked about everything and nothing at the same time. The alcohol made Emily feel lighter, her worries slipping away. She leaned back on the couch, watching Jake as he refilled her glass. "You know," she mused, swirling the liquid in her glass, "I don't get why I always fall for the wrong guys." Jake smirked. "Maybe you're just bad at picking them." Emily rolled her eyes. "And what about you? Why are you still single?" Jake shrugged. "Haven't found the right person, I guess." Emily tilted her head, studying him. "Maybe you're just not looking in the right places." There was something different in the air that night, something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the fact that Emily was feeling vulnerable. But for the first time, she found herself looking at Jake differently. His dark hair was slightly messy, his eyes full of warmth and something else, something she couldn't quite name. Had he always looked at her like that, or was she just noticing it now? Jake held her gaze, his smile fading just a little. He felt it too. The shift, the unspoken tension, but he wasn't sure if it was real or just the alcohol playing tricks on them. Emily broke the silence first. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "This is weird, right?" Jake exhaled, giving her a half-smile. "A little." But neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. For the first time in their friendship, a question hung in the air between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Would they cross the line? The room was warm, filled with the scent of whiskey and the soft hum of music playing in the background. Emily leaned back against the couch, holding her glass loosely in her hand. The alcohol had settled into her veins, making her feel light, almost weightless. She let out a deep sigh, looking over at Jake, who was pouring them another drink. "You know," she said, her voice slightly slurred but still thoughtful, "I think I might just give up on dating altogether." Jake chuckled, handing her the glass. "That bad, huh?" Emily took a sip, nodding. "Every guy I meet is the same. They either don't know what they want, or they're just boring." She sighed again, shaking her head. "Maybe I should just marry myself." Jake smirked. "I'd come to the wedding." Emily laughed, nudging his shoulder. "You'd be my best man." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Not the groom." Emily blinked, caught off guard by his words. There was something playful in his tone, but also something else, something she wasn't sure she was imagining. She searched his face, trying to see if he was joking, but the way he was looking at her felt different. She smiled, trying to shake off the sudden tension. "You never asked." Jake shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "Maybe I should have." The words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. Emily felt a strange warmth in her chest, but she wasn't sure if it was the alcohol or something deeper. She tilted her head, watching him. "Jake, why didn't I ever date you?" Jake's grip on his glass tightened slightly. He let out a small chuckle, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Because we're best friends, Em." Emily smirked, swirling her drink. "Maybe that's the problem. We never even considered it." Jake exhaled, leaning back against the couch. "Did you ever want to?" Emily hesitated. Had she? She had never really thought about it before. Not seriously anyway. Jake had always been there. Always been the one person she could count on. But now, sitting this close to him, feeling the warmth of his presence, she wasn't so sure. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe I should have." Jake watched her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but he could feel something shifting between them, something dangerous. He should have changed the subject, should have laughed it off, but he didn't. Instead, he leaned in just slightly, his voice softer now. "And what about now?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. She felt the air grow thick, felt the space between them shrink. Her fingers twitched slightly against her glass, her mind spinning with thoughts she had never allowed herself to entertain before. Was this just the alcohol, or was this something real? "I don't know," she whispered. Jake swallowed hard, his eyes searching hers. He could feel it, too. The pull, the possibility of something more. He had buried those feelings for years, convinced that their friendship was too important to risk. But now, with Emily looking at him like that, with the air between them crackling with unspoken words, he wasn't sure if he wanted to hold back anymore. Emily's fingers brushed against his hand. It was a light touch, almost accidental, but it sent a shiver through both of them. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, "What if we kissed, just once?" Jake's breath caught in his throat. This was the moment, the line they had never dared to cross. A part of him knew he should stop this before it went any further, but another part of him, a much stronger part, didn't want to. He looked at her lips, then back into her eyes. "Are you sure?" Emily nodded slowly. "I don't know what this means, but I just want to know." Jake hesitated for only a second longer. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he leaned in. Their lips met, soft, uncertain, testing the waters of something that had been left unexplored for far too long. It was slow at first, hesitant, but then something shifted. The kiss deepened, years of unspoken feelings pouring into that single moment. When they finally pulled away, both of them were breathless. Emily's eyes were wide, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Jake ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. What are we doing?" Emily bit her lip, still tasting him there. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I don't want to stop." And just like that, the line between friendship and something more had been crossed. The silence in the room was thick, stretching between them like an invisible thread neither of them dared to cut. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at Emily, still feeling the warmth of her lips on his. He had imagined kissing her before, though he would never admit it, but he never thought it would actually happen. Now that it had, he wasn't sure what to do next. Emily, still breathless from the kiss, searched his face for an answer. She expected him to say something, to make a joke and laugh it off. But he didn't. He just sat there, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the glass still in her hand. "Jake," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are we really doing this?" Jake exhaled slowly, setting his drink down on the table. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I don't think I can pretend that didn't just happen." Emily nodded, licking her lips absent-mindedly. "Me neither." She leaned back slightly, her body still tingling from the way his lips had felt against hers. She had never considered him in this way before, at least, not seriously. But now, sitting this close to him, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on them, she realized something. She wanted him. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the years of built-up trust, the comfort of knowing him better than anyone else. Maybe it was something else entirely, something she had never dared to acknowledge before. Her fingers brushed against his again, and this time it wasn't accidental. She let them linger, testing the waters, watching for his reaction. Jake didn't pull away. He turned his hand over, letting their palms press together. His skin was warm, steady, familiar. but the way it made her feel now was anything but familiar. She took a shaky breath. What if we don't think about it too much? Jake raised an eyebrow. You mean just see where this goes? Emily nodded. Just for tonight. Jake's jaw tightened. He knew this was dangerous. He knew once they crossed this line, there would be no going back to the way things were before. But with Emily looking at him like that, with her eyes dark and full of something he had never seen before, he didn't want to stop. Okay, he said finally. That was all it took. Emily shifted closer, closing the space between them. This time, when she kissed him, there was no hesitation. It was slow, deep, and full of emotions she hadn't realized she was capable of feeling for him. Jake's hands found her waist, pulling her against him as his lips moved with hers, hungry and demanding. A small gasp escaped her lips as he pressed her back against the couch, his body warm and solid against hers. She arched into him, her fingers threading through his hair, pulling him closer. It wasn't just lust. It wasn't just the alcohol. It was years of something unspoken, something buried deep beneath the surface of their friendship. Jake's lips traveled down her neck, sending shivers down her spine. She let out a soft sigh, her body completely surrendering to his touch. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that this was a mistake, that they were risking everything, that in the morning things would never be the same. But right now, in this moment, she didn't care. Right now, she just wanted him. Jake pulled back slightly, his breathing rag. He looked down at her, his fingers brushing against her cheek. Are you sure? Emily met his gaze, her heart pounding. Yes, that was all he needed. With a deep, unspoken understanding between them, they crossed the final line, the one they had spent years pretending didn't exist. And neither of them could turn back now. The night felt different now. The air in Jake's apartment was thick with tension, not the uncomfortable kind, but something deeper, something that made Emily's heart race and her breath quicken. The weight of what they had just done lingered between them, and yet, neither of them moved away. Emily lay beneath Jake, his body hovering just above hers. His fingers traced gentle patterns along her arm, sending shivers through her. The way he looked at her wasn't how a best friend should look, and she knew the way she was looking at him wasn't how she should look at Jake. But none of that mattered anymore. She reached up, running her fingers through his dark hair, feeling the warmth of his skin. She had always known Jake was attractive. Other women had told her so plenty of times, but she had never allowed herself to think of him that way. Not until now. And now she couldn't stop. Jake hesitated for a moment, searching her face. Are you okay? Emily nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, she whispered. I didn't expect this. Jake let out a breath, his fingers brushing over her cheek. Me neither. There was a part of him that wanted to stop, to pull away and pretend like this was just a mistake. But he couldn't. Not when she was looking at him like that, her lips swollen from his kisses, her body pressed so close to his. Do you want to stop? He asked, forcing the words out even though he already knew his own answer. Emily shook her head. No. That was all he needed. He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands exploring her body in ways that had never been allowed before. It was both new and familiar at the same time. He knew her better than anyone else, her favorite movies, her favorite foods, the way she laughed when she was nervous. But this was something different. This was discovering a new side of her, one he had never dared to explore until now. Emily gasped softly as Jake's lips trailed down her neck, his hands gripping her waist. She had been with other men before, but this was different. With Jake, it wasn't just about physical attraction. There was something deeper here. Years of friendship, trust, and a connection that had been building beneath the surface for far too long. She racked her arms around him, pulling him closer. Jake, she murmured against his skin. He responded with another kiss, one that left her dizzy. He wanted her, and she wanted him. There was no doubt about that anymore. As the night continued, they lost themselves in each other, in the heat and the passion that had suddenly ignited between them. Every touch, every whispered breath, sent them further past the point of no return. And when it was over, when the room was silent except for their breathing, Emily lay beside Jake, staring at the ceiling. Her body was still tingling, her mind spinning. She had never expected this to happen. She had never thought she would be here. Lying in Jake's arms, her best friend turned into something more. Jake turned to her, propping himself up on one elbow. His fingers brushed against her arm, a small but intimate gesture. "Are you okay?" he asked again, his voice softer this time. Emily turned her head to look at him, her heart still racing. "Yeah," she said, though her voice was quieter than before. I don't know what this means." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Me neither." They were both silent for a moment, the weight of the situation settling over them. They had crossed a line, one they could never uncross. The thought should have scared her. Maybe it did. But at the same time, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "Do you regret it?" she asked, almost afraid of his answer. Jake shook his head without hesitation. "No," he said firmly. "I don't." Emily exhaled, feeling some of the tension leave her body. "Me neither." But even as she said it, she knew things would never be the same again. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a golden glow over the room. The air was still thick with the scent of whiskey and something else, something deeper, something that had changed everything. Emily stirred, blinking against the light as her mind slowly pulled her from sleep. For a brief moment she forgot where she was, forgot what had happened, but then she felt the warmth beside her, the steady rise and fall of Jake's breathing, and everything came rushing back. Her heart pounded as she turned her head, finding Jake lying beside her. He was still asleep, his dark hair slightly messy, his face relaxed. He looked peaceful, unaware of the storm of emotions building inside her. Last night had happened, it wasn't a dream. Emily swallowed hard, memories flashing through her mind, the way he had kissed her, touched her, whispered her name like it meant something more. It had been incredible, better than she ever could have imagined. But now, in the harsh light of day, reality settled in. She had crossed the line with her best friend. What did this mean? Were they something now? Was this just a mistake? Would Jake regret it when he woke up? Her stomach twisted with uncertainty. Carefully, she sat up, pulling the blanket around her. She needed a moment to think, to breathe. But every thought only led to more confusion. As if sensing her movement, Jake stirred. His eyes fluttered open, hazy with sleep. When he saw her sitting there, wrapped in the blanket, he blinked a few times, as if trying to process everything. Then he smiled. "Morning." His voice was rough with sleep, and it sent a shiver through her. Emily hesitated. "Morning." Jake stretched slightly, his muscles flexing under the sheets. "Are you okay?" There it was again, that question. He had asked her last night and she had said yes. But now she wasn't sure. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice softer than she intended. Jake sat up, leaning on his elbow. "Talk to me, Em." She looked down at the blanket, twisting the fabric between her fingers. What happens now?" Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know." Emily let out a small laugh, though it held no humor. "We keep saying that." Jake watched her carefully. "Do you regret it?" The question hit her harder than she expected. Did she? She thought about the way he had touched her, the way he had looked at her, the way she had felt in his arms. It hadn't felt like a mistake then, and even now, she wasn't sure she could call it one. "No," she said honestly. "I don't regret it." Relief flickered in Jake's eyes. "Me neither." Emily exhaled, feeling some of the tension leave her body. "But what does this mean for us?" Jake sat up fully now, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wish I had a clear answer for you, Em." He looked at her, his expression more serious now. "But I do know one thing, I don't want to lose you." Her chest tightened. "Me neither." Jake reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. It was such a small gesture, but it sent warmth through her. "Maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now," he said. "Maybe we just take this one step at a time." Emily bit her lip. "And if it ruins our friendship?" Jake's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Then we don't let it." It sounded simple when he said it, but they both knew it wasn't. They had spent years building something strong, something that had never been complicated. Until now. Emily sighed, nodding. "Okay, one step at a time." Jake smiled, squeezing her hand. "We'll figure this out, Em, together." And for the first time since waking up, Emily felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. The hours after that morning were filled with unspoken words, stolen glances, and a tension neither of them could quite name. Emily and Jake had agreed to take things one step at a time, but what did that even mean? They hadn't defined anything. Were they friends who had crossed a line? Were they something more now? Or was this just a temporary blur of emotions fueled by alcohol and years of trust? Emily didn't know, and it scared her. That evening, she sat on Jake's couch, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea. She had chosen tea instead of whiskey this time. She needed a clear head. Jake sat beside her, his knee barely touching hers, but that small contact sent warmth through her. It had been like this all day. The smallest touches felt electric. A brush of hands, a passing glance, a quiet moment that lingered too long. Everything between them had changed, even though they were pretending it hadn't. Jake cleared his throat, breaking the silence. So, what now? Emily looked at him, her heart pounding at the question. I don't know, she admitted. It had become their favorite answer. Jake chuckled, rubbing his face. We really suck at this. Emily smiled slightly. Yeah, we do. They both fell silent again. The weight of last night still lingered between them, refusing to be ignored. Finally, Jake turned to face her, his expression more serious now. Listen, Em, I don't want to mess this up. Whatever this is, I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to lose you. Emily swallowed hard. I don't want to lose you either. Jake hesitated before reaching for her hand. His touch was familiar, warm, safe. But now it carried something else, something that made her pulse race. I don't know what this means, he continued, but I know I want to be with you. Emily's breath caught in her throat. He was laying it out there, raw and honest. No jokes, no deflection, just the truth. And suddenly, she knew her answer. She squeezed his hand. I want to be with you too. Jake's shoulders relaxed, as if he had been holding his breath. He let out a soft chuckle. That's a good start. Emily smiled, but there was still something nagging at her. But what if we ruin everything? Jake tilted his head. What if we don't? She stared at him, his confidence making her heart ache. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that they could do this without falling apart. Jake seemed to sense her hesitation because he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Emily, we've been through everything together. If anyone can figure this out, it's us. She sighed, nodding. Yeah, I guess you're right. Jake smirked. I'm always right. Emily laughed, shaking her head. Now I remember why I never dated you before. Jake grinned. Too late now. And just like that, the tension cracked. The laughter, the ease, it was still there. The foundation of their friendship hadn't disappeared overnight. It had just shifted. Jake leaned in slightly, his voice softer now. So if we're doing this, can I kiss you again? Emily's pulse quickened. She didn't hesitate this time. Yes. Jake didn't need any more encouragement. He closed the distance between them, capturing her lips in a slow, deep kiss. Unlike the night before, this one wasn't rushed, wasn't fueled by alcohol or impulsive emotions. This was real. And as she melted into him, Emily knew there was no turning back. They had crossed the line. And this time, they weren't looking back with regret. They were looking forward, together. The days after that night were different. Everything between Emily and Jake had changed, yet somehow nothing had. They still texted about random things. They still laughed at inside jokes that no one else understood. They still argued over what movie to watch and who owed who coffee. But now there was something new, something deeper. Jake held her hand without thinking about it. Emily found herself leaning into him more, letting her fingers brush against his when they sat side by side. Their friendship hadn't disappeared. It had only grown into something more. But with that change came new fears. Emily was the first to say it out loud. One evening they sat together at Jake's apartment, the glow of the TV flickering in the background. They weren't really watching, it was just background noise. Jake's arm was draped around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. It felt natural, easy, like they had been doing this for years. But Emily's mind was spinning. What happens if this doesn't work? She asked, her voice quiet. Jake's fingers, which had been lazily tracing patterns on her arm, paused. What do you mean? Emily sat up slightly, turning to face him. I mean, what if we ruin everything? What if we don't work out and we can't go back to how things were? Jake studied her, his blue eyes searching hers. Is that what you're afraid of? Emily nodded. Yeah. Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. We've been friends for years. We've been through so much already. Do you really think one bad breakup could erase all of that? Emily bit her lip. I don't know. Jake reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I can't promise that we'll never have problems, but I can promise that I'm not going anywhere. Emily held his gaze, her heart pounding. And if we don't work? Jake smirked. Then we'll blame you and I'll still win all our arguments. Emily rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. You're impossible. Jake tugged her closer. Yeah, but you love me for it. The words hit her harder than she expected, because he was right. She loved him. Not just as her best friend, not just as the person who had been by her side for years. She loved him in a way that scared her, in a way she had never dared to think about before. And looking at Jake now, she knew he felt the same. She didn't say it out loud, not yet, but she didn't have to. Instead, she kissed him, slow and soft, letting her lips speak the words she wasn't ready to say. Jake responded instantly, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss. It was different from the first time, different from the second. This wasn't about crossing a line anymore. This was about them. When they finally pulled apart, Jake rested his forehead against hers. So, does this mean you're finally admitting that you like me? Emily laughed, shaking her head. I think it's worse than that. Jake raised an eyebrow. Worse? She smiled, tracing her fingers over his jaw. Yeah, I think I'm falling for you. Jake's expression softened, and then without hesitation he whispered, Good, because I've already fallen. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had been afraid of this, of risking everything, but now, looking at him, she realized something. Some things were worth the risk. She smiled. So what now? Jake grinned. Now, we take it one step at a time. And this time Emily wasn't afraid, because for the first time she knew exactly where she wanted to be. Right here, with him.